History seems to be a lot of things to a lot of people, but as a general definition, history typically is defined as the objective study of past events, if by objective we mean reference to the real events and not simply the individual beliefs of said events. History is obviously very important, for to know ourselves fully we would be wise to know those who came before us. For example, I would think it important for one to know the origin and evolution of ideologies that we face today, consumerism, materialism, liberty, things like that, in order to fully know the factors that affect our thinking today. History is also useful in setting before us an objective list of events and people that are said to exist and have done blank, whatever blank might be at such and such in time. Muhammad Gandhi, Muhammad, Abraham Lincoln, etc. Without such an objective list, our toolbox in which we use to examine the world would be mortally impaired. Who could say that one's history is not another's fiction? It is here that we run into an increasingly popular view of history in our increasingly postmodern culture, namely that history is not an objective tool used to build thought and belief on, but rather is a subjectively and deeply illegitimate tool with little practical use. The salvo often fired at historical inquiry is prima facie forceful. History cannot be viewed directly, nor can it be reconstructed precisely. Historical knowledge comes predominantly through sources, which can be selective and biased. Memories of the sources can be faded and distorted, and sometimes the credibility of eyewitness testimony is questioned. In sum, there's a saying, history is written by the winners. Indeed, we are faced with a rather troubling quandary when we look at the historical investigation. On the one hand, history is obviously important for both practical and investigative reasons, while on the other, it seems that we are basing a lot of important information on a flawed and vague system. We are taught vital truths that seem to be unearthed with imprecision, and this makes us doubt. But it is here that I would like to begin to formulate a series on the use of history, and more specifically, historical findings as justifiable evidence, if they are such a thing. Recall that within the first 3 seconds I defined history as the objective study of past events. Did I simply neglect the seemingly devastating laundry list of inherent issues with history? Isn't history merely the writings of the winners, those who thought their personal biases painted a picture they would like us to believe? Well, I think not. It is my thesis that historical conclusions, while needing to be held provisionally, can be objective landmarks that we can use to investigate and justify facts. Succinctly, it is my contention that historical conclusions can count as evidence for beliefs. For example, numerous letters discovered and preserved from the 1800s, written by men claiming to be fighting in a civil war, combined with archaeological war sites, provides good reason to believe that such a war occurred. Now, in order to defend this contention, I need to revisit the opening salvo that I mentioned briefly before. Specifically, I need to examine 3 major obstacles against the notion that historical conclusions warrant evidence. Those being 1, historical inquiry lacks direct access to what it studies and is therefore imprecise. 2, biases present a lack of neutrality. And 3, the postmodernist objection to objective history exists, i.e., the conjectural nature of history calls into question the possibility that the past can be described. In the sections to come, I will look at each objection and conclude, given the reasons in those sections, that each in turn is not as devastating as it first appears. Given the failings of these 3 objections, it would seem dubious to argue against the thesis in this paper. Those who argue that a lack of direct access lends historical inquiry towards imprecision should look hard and fast about other tools of investigation and their success, for example, science. Those who feel skittish about the historical conclusions based on biases should apply the 4 ideas contained in the sections below on that subject, and those who hold to a postmodernist view of history need to understand and examine the self-refuting nature of their position. Succinctly, it is my contention that historical conclusions, while needing to be held provisionally, can be objective landmarks that we can use as investigators to justify facts. In other words, historical conclusions can count as evidence and justification for beliefs, and what's more, be quite persuasive at times to adopt a new set of beliefs.